So, Chairman McCall, members of the task force, I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to speak to you today and for your leadership to focus on the threats that the Communist Chinese Party has for the United States and our people. Not only in terms of threats against our economic opportunity, but our national security. These threats manifest themselves in numerous ways. Today's I want to focus upon the vulnerabilities in our pharmaceutical supply chain and to build on what Mr. Posey was talking about just a few minutes ago. There's little doubt that the worldwide spread of the SARS-CoV-2 Wuhan virus and the resulting outbreak of COVID-19 has laid bare the extreme risk in the U.S. pharmaceutical supply chain. Over the past few decades, we have lost significant capacity to domestically produce our vital and our life-saving medicines. As a result, greater burden has fallen upon the FDA to perform safety inspections on foreign facilities outside the United States under difficult conditions. A recent GAO investigation into FDA's ability to adequately ensure quality assurance through inspection of foreign facilities shows that the agency continues to fall behind on performing routine inspections due to severe staff shortages, among other things. Over the past 2 years, there have been numerous FDA safety recalls of pharmaceutical products from Chinese manufacturers. These pharmaceuticals these recalls are the canary in the mine for a problem created by offshoring pharmaceutical manufacturing. This risk must be addressed now by returning pharmaceutical manufacturing to U.S. soil. In May, I introduced the Safe and Secure Medicine Supply for Hardworking Americans Act, H.R. 6885. It is specifically designed to eliminate that risk. The Safe and Secure Medicine Supply for Hardworking Americans Act does the following. It creates incentives to rebuild the U.S. pharmaceutical and medical device chain by incentivizing companies to manufacture their products and their active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs, which are the building blocks for most of the pharmaceuticals that we have today, and by disincentivizing the importation of drugs from insecure sources, particularly China and to a lesser extent India. It improves the safety of products by enacting significant civil penalties on both foreign facilities that manufacture tainted medicines and on the folks that import those into the United States. It creates supply chain transparency by requiring the FDA to create a publicly available registry indicating the country of origin for FDA-approved drugs. Here are the highlights of the legislative provisions in the bill. First, the incentive grant program. It creates a secure medicine supply fund and incentive grant program to provide financial incentives to build manufacturing capacity in the United States. The grants may be used to build facilities, train workers, and to develop new products, particularly antibiotics. The fund is financed by monetary penalties on importers of tainted drugs and by tariffs on imported pharmaceutical products from foreign countries. Second, tariffs on imported pharmaceuticals. Tariffs on imported drugs are intended to discourage companies from locating manufacturing facilities outside of the U.S. The bill places a 25% tariff on products from China, 20% on products from India, and 10% on all others. Third, monetary penalties for tainted drugs. Occurrences of contaminated medicines entering the U.S. supply chain have risen significantly in the last several years, particularly from China, and you heard Mr. Posey talk about that just a few minutes ago. To mitigate this problem, the bill penalizes both foreign facilities that produce the tainted products and the entities that import them in the United States. Fines range from $10 million to $100 million per occurrence based upon the frequency and severity of the violations. Fourth, a ban on imports of facilities that produce tainted drugs. So if you've had a facility that's produced a tainted drug, both they and the importer, and the FDA issues a Class 1 or Class 2 recall, both they and the importer will pay a fine. And then, if there's a repeat violation, that facility is not only fined but banned for up into perpetuity from being able to export drugs to the United States. Fifth, transparency. This bill creates an FDA registry of FDA-approved drugs and APIs. The Secretary of HHS shall create a registry of FDA-approved drugs manufactured outside the U.S. that lists the country of origin and each step in the supply chain prior to entering the U.S. It also lists the drugs for which 50% or more of their APIs are manufacturing outside of the United States. And it requires a U.S. label to show the country of origin for each API. I urge the House to quickly consider this legislation to plug a growing gap in an industry that's critical to the health, economic opportunity, and security of hardworking American families. And I'm available to answer questions.
No, thanks, Congressman Flores, and it's an excellent bill, very comprehensive, I must say as well. I like the FDA provisions. In terms of incentivizing, I know you talked about grants. What about any tax provisions?
No tax provisions are in this bill. What we've tried to do is remain tax neutral. Now, I'm not opposed to tax incentives. If somebody wanted to come on and add an amendment to this bill to add tax incentives, I would be I'd be supportive of that effort to do that.
So no, in the advanced semiconductor chip industry, we're looking at, refundable investment tax credits.
Right.
So, yeah,
And I would think that would fit nicely into this type of an approach.
that's great.
This came out of ENC hearings that we had last year that talked about tainted drugs. I was able to get those hearings onto the agenda because I'd had a particular blood pressure medicine, the one that Posey was talking about a few minutes ago, that had carcinogens in it.
Wow.
And this pattern continues to repeat. He talked about heparin before. They've had numerous drugs in the last 2 years that have been recalled.
So very good point. Any members? Yes, Mr. Gonzalez.
Mr. Flores, thank you for bringing this forward. This it certainly is a top priority. I think, Frank, it's one of the things that we have to get right, and everybody the country is waiting for it. My question, two questions. One, with respect to the grant fund, what's the size of that fund? And then the second question would be, with respect to your work on ENC, what's the current status of the bill with respect to support from other members and things like that?
One of the problems that we've seen is that politics has entered into everything that we're trying to do. And so last year when we started this initiative, we had good support from the chair of the Health Subcommittee on ENC. But since then, you'll find no Democratic support for any Republican-introduced bill. I think at the end of the day, the public cares so much about this that we will ultimately find support, but they don't seem to be interested in that at this point. But the American people is spooked by what happened with the Wuhan virus and with COVID-19.
No.
We haven't set the size. The way it's set up is you take all the tariffs on the imported drugs, and then you take all the fines and you put those into a pool, and then the CBO can project that out 5 years, and then that is available. We can have the CBO do some projections on that and what it would be, but it would be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. By the way, the tariffs would not increase the cost of drugs to Americans because the Chinese would do what they've always done. That's reset their currency rates so that they absorb the cost and we don't.
Mr. Joyce?
Joyce?
Mr. Flores, thank you. Thank you for addressing an important issue in this, and that's the country of origin. This is a way that many pharmaceuticals go around the end and bring medicines to us onshore, tainted medicines, risky medicines. This is a significant piece of legislation. Thank you for bringing it today for us to discuss. Thank you for your hard work on it as well. In face, this is not a partisan issue. These medicines are taken by all Americans.
That's correct. That is exactly correct.
Now, Mr. Barr.
Congressman Flores, thank you for your leadership on this great bill and appreciate your attention to this very critical issue. I'm wondering, in your work on this issue and especially on ENC, have you all looked at why there was an exodus of domestic manufacturing of pharmaceuticals in Puerto Rico? And does your bill help to rebuild a pharmaceutical manufacturing base in the territories and especially Puerto Rico?
Mm-hmm. The reason for the exodus from Puerto Rico is that there was a tax provision in Puerto Rico that allowed U.S. pharmaceutical companies to manufacture pharmaceuticals there and then to sell basically tax-free with no income tax. That provision expired. When that tax provision expired, then you begin to see that plus the regulatory structure in the United States cause the pharmaceutical manufacturing supply chain to leak out overseas, and the Chinese took advantage of that as well as the Indians. This bill doesn't address that issue, but I would be fine including a provision to help our territories become tax havens, if you will, to produce American pharmaceuticals. That would go well. That would interface well with the tax incentives that Mr. McCall talked about.